Hey there, and welcome to another Yarnspirations tutorial. My name is Brittany from Be Hooked, and I'll be your guide as I demonstrate how to crochet the color block bobble scarf. Let's get started. Before we dive into the tutorial, let's have a quick look at the pattern. By the way, you can download this pattern completely free from yarnspirations.com. Well, the one really important thing I want to point out here is that we have a 4-row pattern repeat. So what we see here on the first page of the pattern is 5 rows of information. Now this first row here is just a setup row. We'll briefly cover that. It's basically just double crochet all the way through. And with row number 2, this starts the beginning of our 4-row pattern repeat. There are a couple takeaways I'd like for you to have from what we're seeing here, and that is that we have 2 bobble rows and 2 double crochet rows. So our even number rows are our bobble rows, and then of course our odd numbered rows are the double crochet rows. All right, so with that in mind, let's grab color A. We'll dive into this stitch pattern. Now before we get started with the pattern, we need to start a foundation row before we start off that stitch multiple. So we'll make a chain of 23. And in the first row, we'll just make 1 double crochet for every chain, starting here with the 4th chain from the hook. Now once we have our setup row complete, row number 2 kicks off our stitch pattern repeat. Again, this is a 4-row repeat, but we're doing a lot of the same techniques here. So to start row 2, we'll chain 1 and turn our work. We'll make 1 single crochet into each of the first 2 stitches. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so I'll make my first single crochet right there, followed by the second. Then we're ready to do a bobble stitch. To do that, we're going to make 5 double crochets in the same stitch. And then when you have your 5 double crochets in the same stitch, it looks kind of like a shell. Well, we're going to pull up on this working loop, remove our hook, find your first double crochet, and stick your hook into that stitch. Then swing it through the back and grab that working loop, pull that tight, then we're going to pull this working loop through the stitch. And to finish it off, we'll chain 1. Now what we'll need to do is work 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. And that starts the repeat for this row. We'll bobble in the next, followed by 3 single crochets. We'll complete that until we get to the end of the row when we have 2 stitches remaining. Now when you've reached the end of your row and you have 2 stitches remaining, we'll make a single crochet into each. So this second to last stitch will be an actual stitch, but our very last stitch is going to be a chain 3. So we'll find our 3rd chain, we'll make a slip stitch there to finish off the row. So one easy way to memorize the stitch pattern is that we have a bobble row followed by a double crochet row. Now there is a difference in the 2 bobble rows that we're repeating, and it's basically how we start and end each round. So keep in mind and just remember that in one case, we're going to start with 2 stitches at the beginning and 2 stitches at the end. Now moving on to row number 3, we're going to chain 3, which counts as a stitch. We'll turn our work, and we need to make 1 double crochet into every stitch. Now since this counts as a stitch, we won't work here. I'll work my double crochet in the next stitch. And things can get a little confusing over these bobbles. You want to be careful that you don't add a stitch here by working into your chain. What I like to do is find the stitch right next to that and work my double crochet there. It's always a good practice to get into to count your stitches to make sure you're on the right track. We'll have a total of 21 for this scarf. Now once again, I'm ignoring the chain. I'll double crochet into the actual stitch. Now we have a nice solid row of double crochet at the end of row number 3. We're ready to continue on to row number 4. Now row 4 is going to be a bobble row, so I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and that chain 1 does not count as a stitch. And this time I'll increase the amount of stitches that I'm going to start with. Basically the end goal is to make our bobbles offset from one another. So they're not right on top of each other, but rather in between. So because we used 2 stitches to get this bobble right here, I'm going to use 4 single crochets to get my bobble into the middle. Then I'll go ahead and make my bobble in the next stitch. Now we can see the placement is a little bit different there, and we can proceed with our familiar repeat. I'll make 3 single crochets followed by another bobble, and I'll work that to the end of the row until this time I have 4 stitches remaining. Then I'll work a single crochet into my last 4 stitches, being mindful that my last stitch is a chain 3, so I'll find that 3rd chain, single crochet there. Now to complete the stitch pattern repeat, we just need 1 more row of double crochets. These are worked exactly the same as we saw back in row number 3, and that's the stitch repeat. So now that you understand how to crochet the stitch pattern, we need to address the repeat. We can see the repeat starts right here. We're going to work this pattern, so rows 2 through 5, until our work measures 30 inches from our starting row. We want to make sure that we're ending on a wrong side row. So that means we're going to end after we complete a double crochet row. From there, we're still going to work the same stitch pattern, but we're going to incorporate a color change. So let's have a look now at how you're going to change to a new skein and a new color for this section of the pattern. All right, so now that you've seen the technique of the stitch pattern, there's one more thing you'll need to learn before it's off to the races and finishing your scarf. So we need to do some color changes. And right here, I'm at the end of my first section, working with my color A, and I'm on the wrong side. As you can see here, I have 1 more stitch remaining. I'll make my double crochet, but I don't want to finish that stitch. So yarn over, pull through 2, and then leave it here. This is going to give you the best results for your color change. Then simply grab your color B. You can fold that over, place that loop on your hook, and use that to pull through the remaining 2. That'll finish your double crochet, and it will also get your new color into place. We can trim off that yarn, and what I like to do before I get going is take these 2 tails, tie them together just so they're nice and secure so that I can weave them in later. Now from here, you would follow along with your pattern just as we've seen in the previous section where we covered the stitch pattern. Piece of cake, right? Changing colors is really simple. You'll use that same technique when you need to add on a new ball of yarn as well. Okay, so we can see here from the pattern that we have 3 different colors. We're going to incorporate that color change as the pattern indicates. Basically, we're going to work the same stitch pattern for a certain number of inches before we change. So after we've worked color A, we fastened off, we've added our second color, now we pick up on this part of the pattern. We want to continue working rows 2 through 5 until our work measures 90 inches from our starting edge and ending once again on a wrong side row. Then, once we get to that point, we can refer to page number 2 of the pattern. We will fasten off color B, join color C, and then we'll continue working in that stitch pattern, rows 2 through 5, until our scarf measures 110 inches from our starting edge. So let's have a look at how to add the edging. Now when you get to the edging, we're going to work with single crochets. You'll find just the first corner, and I'm going to make a slip knot with the same color yarn. We want to make sure that we match these color transitions, and for the corner we're going to have 3 single crochets. That's what the pattern tells us, so I'll work 3 single crochets. Now I personally don't like to count that chain 1 as a stitch, so I'll work 3 single crochets, and I'm just working it around the side of this first row. Then what I'm going to do is find the next row, which is a bobble row. I'll work a single crochet in the side of that row, and then when I come to my double crochet rows, I'll make 2 single crochets around that side. We want to just evenly space these single crochets. That way we don't have any puckering or anything like that. We're not adding too many stitches, making it ruffly, and we're not adding too few, making it sort of pucker. Now, the important takeaway here is that we match our color changes along the edges. So basically what that means is we'll work the edging with the same color, and then when we get to the point where we need to change color or where the scarf changes color, we want to fasten off and join on the color that matches that next color section. You'll use the same technique that we saw a moment ago. After you do this, fasten off, weave in your ends, and of course, add the fringe. Your scarf will be complete.